Biblical significance of numbers. The number 20. The number 20 can convey a meaning of a complete or perfect waiting period. In Genesis chapter 29 verses 20 and 27, Jacob works for a relative named Laban for 14 years in order to have the right to marry his daughter Rachel, whom he dearly loved. He then works another 6 years for Laban in order to build up his wealth for a total of 20 years. In Genesis chapter 31 verse 41, Jacob said to Laban, 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock. In Genesis chapter 31 verse 3, after serving Laban 20 years, God commands Jacob to return to the land of Canaan. For 20 years, in Judges chapters 4 and 5, the children of Israel waited to be freed of Jabin, king of Canaan, who oppressed them. God's response was to raise up Deborah and Barak, who freed the people from bondage. The scriptures record at least 20 separate messages conveyed while a person is sleeping. In Genesis chapter 20 verses 2 to 7, God told Abimelech he was a dead man because the woman he took was another man's wife. But he didn't know Sarah was Abraham's wife. He was told she was his sister. So God told him if he returned her to Abraham, he wouldn't die. In Genesis chapter 28 verse 12, Jacob dreamed a ladder was set up on the earth, the top of it reached to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. In Genesis chapter 31 verse 10, Jacob saw that the goats that mated with the flock were striped and spotted. In Genesis chapter 31 verse 24, God told Laban not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. In Genesis chapter 37 verse 5, Joseph had a dream, his brothers would bow down to him. In Genesis chapter 37 verse 9, Joseph had a second dream, his parents would bow down as well. In Genesis chapter 40 verse 5, the cupbearer, while in prison, had a dream about a vine, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. He took the grapes, and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, which meant he would be restored to his position. In Genesis chapter 40 verse 5, the baker, also in prison, had a dream about 3 cake baskets on his head. The top one was full of baked food for Pharaoh, and birds were eating the food, which meant he would be put to death. In Genesis chapter 41 verses 1 to 4, Pharaoh had a dream about 7 plump cows and 7 thin cows. The thin cows ate up the 7 plump cows, which meant there would be 7 years of harvest, followed by 7 years of famine. In Genesis chapter 41 verses 5 to 7, Pharaoh then had a dream about 7 years of grain, plump and good, and 7 years, thin and blighted. The thin ears swallowed up the plump ears, which also meant there would be 7 years of harvest, followed by 7 years of famine. In Judges chapter 7 verses 13 to 15, Gideon would conquer the Midianites. In 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 5, God offers King Solomon anything he wants. In Daniel chapter 2 verses 39 to 44, Nebuchadnezzar has it revealed to him all the world empires to exist until Christ's return. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has it revealed to him his punishment for being so vain. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel is told about 4 great world empires. In Matthew chapter 1 verses 20 and 21, Joseph was told to take Mary as his wife. In Matthew chapter 2 verse 12, the wise men were warned not to visit Herod on their way home. In Matthew chapter 2 verse 13, Joseph was told to take his family to Egypt. In Matthew chapter 2 verse 20, Joseph was told to take his family to Israel. In Matthew chapter 27 verse 19, Pilate's wife receives a troubling warning that her husband should not do anything to harm Jesus. In Numbers chapter 1 verse 3, at the time of King David, only those Levites who were 20 years old or older were eligible to do God's work. In Genesis chapter 18 verse 31, Abraham was able to negotiate with God, Jesus Christ in the flesh, that if 20 righteous people were found in Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities would be spared destruction.